Anybody want to take a guess on who's next? What's going on, Todd? Next, we have Indiana.
So we are not the third most populous state in the Midwest. I think we're just the third biggest to show up, right? Because Ohio's bigger than we are. We decided we'd give our little talk on a couple different things, so I brought Clint with me. We're going to talk about some of the neat things I think we're doing from an asset management standpoint, and then Clint's got an update on some neat scrub seal stuff he's doing in his district. But then we also wanted to introduce Jason Lowther. He's our third person from Indiana, way in the back. Jason's our statewide technical services director. He's my boss, so I need to do a good job. So we've come up with this concept, we've called them different names, and we've arrived on road categories. This is a new way that we've come up with to manage our pavements, hopefully, and maybe get into bridges. So we've come up with three major categories. We call them A, B, and C. Generally speaking, the A's are our interstates, the B's are freeways and arterials, and then C's would be everything else. I say generally speaking because we had a committee put together these guidelines and we automated it and said here, and it kind of looked like a patchwork. You know, you've got different roads going and they change categories and then they change and change. So we allowed our districts to go in and kind of from a system continuity standpoint, adjust those. So for each major category, we break it into a minor category. So the A's have A1s and A2s, B1s and B2s, et cetera. And generally the ones and the twos would be more of our urban and the twos would be more of our rural. And again, from a starting standpoint, we drew that line for the A's at 40,000 ADT. More than that would be a 1, less than that would be a 2. For the B's, we kind of arrived at 5,000 per lane as an ADT. And then our C's would be, generally speaking, 5,000. So we would consider less than 5,000 to be our lowest category. And we've made this an attribute of what we call our pavement sections or pavement keys. So our pavement engineers, our asset managers, they have these sections, their physical limits, and we manage those. So we do a resurface contract or a chip seal. We're going to do it within the same sections every time. Okay, how do we use this in asset management? From a capital side, we've incorporated this into our scoring rules. So when we come up with a capital project for pavement, we give points depending on the road category. 8 different criteria we use to assign points, and this is just one of them. But what we're saying here from a risk, we're looking at it from a risk standpoint, meaning our A1s are very high volume, are very visible urban interstates. We're much less tolerant to risk on those, meaning fear of the road failing, than we are the C2s, the other end of the spectrum, where if that road were to fall apart, not the end of the world. So what we're saying here, the bottom column there is the points. So to get maximum points, we're saying on an A1, I've only got to get to 10 years between resurface jobs to get to maximum points. Whereas on the C2s, we got to get to at least 20 years. So obviously there's no resurface out there that's going to last 20 years, so we've got to have some preservation in the middle. From a maintenance standpoint, kind of arrived on different cycles depending on, and I've just taken an excerpt here, so depending on the road category, we might have more specific or more frequent maintenance cycles than we would on an urban. And I don't have that on here, but a great example of that is mowing, right, Clint? So we, on our very, very low volume rural roads, we may do 1 or 2 mowing cycles a year versus our urban ones, I think we're up to 8. What's the impact of that? And I'm going to go back and forth here between center and lane miles. This is all lane miles on this page. So about a third of our network from a lane mile standpoint, about 10,000 miles is what we would consider that C2, the very, very lowest category. So if we want to get 20 years between resurface jobs on that, there has to be some preservation in the middle. We estimate, and you guys can do the math, a PM overlay, I've heard 1.5 inches, 2 inches, that $140,000 a lane mile, so that's about $70 million a year if we get on that 20-year cycle. So intermediate to that, we're going to have to get in and do several intervals of crack sealing and then a couple intervals of chip sealing to get us out to 20 years. And interestingly, I used to be a big advocate of chip sealing forever. Chip seal that road as many times as you can. We are far enough down the path now in our preservation program where we've got a lot of roads we've put that 3rd chip seal on, and we're not real satisfied with the performance. So 2 chip seals is about the limit. If we can get 3, that's great, but generally speaking, it's going to be 2. The other end, our highest volume roads, less than 10% of our network from a lane mile standpoint. Again, these are the lowest tolerance for risk, so we're saying we're going to get 10 years out of that, and then so much less of an interval from a capital standpoint. Fun facts, from a center line mile standpoint now, the A1s are only 4% of our network, but they carry 30% of our trucks, which is interesting. The other end, from a centerline standpoint, almost half of our network is the C2s, and they carry less than 10% of our actual total traffic ADT. So I know, John, you talked about getting a fuel tax increase. You look at these roads from a revenue standpoint, they don't generate any revenue. So that's why we've got to get the most years out of those that we can. We've got one district that's in the coal area, southwest Indiana, and that's all we hear about is coal trucks, coal trucks, coal trucks. Interestingly, that district has less than 10% of the total trucks in the state. So another thing, not really related to road category, but we've developed 20-year capital plans and 5-year maintenance plans, and part of that was we were required by our legislature because we had a gas tax increase a couple of years ago, and one of the requirements in the legislation is like, okay, NDOT, you will have a 20-year capital program. So we developed that, and in conjunction, we've come up with, every district has a 5-year maintenance plan. So that's our crack sealing, our chip sealing, some other operations as well. So it's very, from an asset management standpoint now, it's very good to align this and see, okay, here's what I'm gonna be doing from a maintenance standpoint versus a capital standpoint. We're trying to develop this into a dynamic, living map almost, because as you guys all know, projects come in and out. So you have money you didn't realize, and so you get a resurface job that accelerates. Well, that impacts what you're going to do from a maintenance standpoint to that road, and then vice versa. Also trying to implement the concept of corridor planning. So corridors being, instead of the pavement people just looking at the pavement and the bridge people just looking at the bridge, we look at a corridor. So I may have I-70 between these two interchanges. If I've got a major road job coming, I'm going to be out there doing work. It doesn't make sense to not do the bridges when you're out there. You know, we have a lot of roads where we're out there doing a capital job this year on the pavement. We come back next year and do a couple bridge decks, and then we come back a few years later and do something else. So again, we end up with roads that are constantly under construction. We want to get out of that mindset where get in and get out for at least 5 years. Clint's going to talk about his scrub seal.
So those of you that have been attending for a few years, every year we talk about scrub seals at NDOT. Every year I feel really energized when I leave this meeting in the fall, and then by the time the spring and summer roll around, day-to-day grind kind of takes place, so it kind of takes a back burner. So after we left Madison last year, I asked a colleague to make sure that she held me accountable and sent me daily reminders, weekly reminders on making sure we implemented it this year. One thing we wanted to do was kind of a in-house research project. So we do a lot of chip seals in-house. We already have all the equipment. Just needed a scrubber. So we kind of looked at different combinations. So for the last few years, we've used a combination of our standard chip seal emulsion and more or less sand. It seemed to work okay. The only problem was the aesthetics weren't great. There wasn't a lot of wearing surface. So this year, we decided we were going to use our standard chip seal emulsion. And then we also used a high float rapid set emulsions, HFRS2P, supplied by Marathon. For our aggregate, we used a clean limestone with some dolomite in it. It was about a 1/4 inch on the top side. So here is the green broom. I think those of you that were here last year, you remember Todd talking about we searched all over the country trying to find a scrubber, tried to make 2 in-house that probably cost 5 or 10 times as much as this thing cost to buy new. We went ahead and did this demo about 2 weeks ago. So we did friction before, we're doing friction after. We're going to go ahead and do some friction after the course of the winter, as well as after next summer, to just kind of make sure that we're getting good friction out of it. Here's the HFRS2P. And there's the finished product. So the application rate was a little heavy on the stone, but it's a demo. So Todd was talking about road classifications. So this was actually a B2, if anybody cares. So I actually thought it was going to be a C2 because it is a pretty low volume, but it's a multi-lane divided road. So we really wanted, from an operational standpoint, if we really screwed up one lane, we could always shut down the lane. Obviously, we don't want that. It kind of worked out well for us, too, because it's just south of an interstate, between another state road and the interstate, so it was about 5 miles long, so it was a good section to kind of do that test. As far as where we see this going in the future, next year I'd like to, so 2/3 of our state are roughly using RS2P. The other third uses a CRS2P. So next year I'd like to get 2 more emulsions, one of them being our CRS2P, and do that in the southbound lane. We did this in the northbound lane to just kind of get a comparison. And that is an up close of the scrub seal. Any questions?
So you mentioned that you were using the high float rapid set, and then you're going to look at a CRS2P. Are you adding rejuvenator to these mixes for your scrub seal?
No. Right now, when I talk about the 4th emulsion, that's something we're looking at is having one of them a rejuvenator in it, because I know a lot of other states use an emulsion with rejuvenator in it. Our demos we did the last few years on access roads and unit parking lots, we didn't really have any issues, so that's why we kind of thought, definitely, we don't want to exclude it, but at the same time, if we already have everything right here and it's going good, we don't really want to change it either.
When you do the CRS-2P one, are you going to have a section that you'll allow somebody to come in and do the rejuvenating CMS-1P emulsion in that same section so you can see if you get any difference?
What we did, actually, we paired with Marathon, so they actually came out and provided a distributor load of the HFRS-2P. We used our RS-2P initially, and then once we finished that distributor, we switched distributors, did their load, so that's what we thought. It kind of worked out well, about 2.5 miles per load. We can go ahead and do the southbound lane next year with 2 others. So if you have some material you'd like us to look at, by all means, reach out.
Clint, it looked like you had some rumble strips in there. Did the scrub seal fill those in, create wells for the material?
Kind of talk about, earlier we were talking about RPM castings and things of that nature. So where I'm at is West Central Indiana. So we actually have a practice when we go out and we chip seal a road. And we do about 300 miles annually. We always remove the RPM castings now. And kind of the reason was after 1 year, they kind of lose their effectiveness. After year 2, even more so. So we remove them. If they need to be reinstalled, we'll go ahead and reinstall RPM castings. If we don't, we put rumble strips in. We've not really seen, they're still pretty effective. We've done roads now twice that have had the rumbles. You could still, they're not as noticeable, but you still can hear them as you're going down the road.
And what is Next Level Indiana? The logo in the lower right.
That's marketing.
We got our gas tax increase a couple years ago, so we're awash in money now. So next level is what we call our capital program.
Thank you, guys.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.